Google just dropped Gemini 3 Flash, calling it frontier intelligence built for speed. The first thing we're going to do is head over to Google AI Studio to compare pricing. Right now I've selected Gemini 3 Flash Preview. Input cost for 1 million tokens is set to 50 cents and output cost for 1 million tokens is $3. If we go down to Gemini Flash Latest, which currently points to Gemini 2.5 Flash, the input cost for 1 million tokens is 30 cents. The output cost for 1 million tokens is $2.50. That represents a 67% increase on the input, a 20% increase on the output. Another thing I want to highlight is how they've set up thinking for this model. You actually have 4 different options: minimal, low, medium, and high. By default, it's set to high. And if we go to Gemini 2.5 Flash for comparison, under thinking, you only have the option to toggle thinking mode on or off and then set a thinking budget if thinking mode is turned on. Now, when I looked at the documentation to better understand this, especially in the context of using it through API calls, it says Gemini models engage in dynamic thinking by default, automatically adjusting the amount of reasoning effort based on the complexity of the user's request. But the default is actually set to high, or high dynamic is a better way to put it. Now, if I go over to n8n with a simple LLM chain, and this is typically how I'm going to be deploying these models in my workflow, at present, there's no setting under option where you can actually set the thinking. I typically run this with Gemini 2.5 Flash, so this is an evaluation to see if I should be upgrading to Gemini 3 Flash for this workflow. So just to give you some background in terms of how this works, this is a workflow that I use for SEO research before I create a YouTube video. You'll see that this part of the workflow is the most dense and time consuming because this is where the model is actually digesting all of the data, then creating the output. So what I do is I actually put in a search query and a location, and then I set the status to pending. It pulls this information into the workflow. It runs 2 simultaneous SERP API calls, one for organic Google search and a second for YouTube search. It merges the output of both of them into a JavaScript node, which then cleans up the data and passes it on to the data analyst. So now we're going to run it again, but with 2.5 Flash, and then we're going to compare the outputs. So I'm just going to switch the model over here. Now keep in mind, these steps should take the exact same amount. There really shouldn't be a difference there. This is really the only part of the workflow where you should have some divergence because we're using 2 different models. And keep in mind, there also is no setting that's turned on for 2.5 Flash with respect to thinking. So it is deploying thinking. There's no budget that's set for thinking. So this is 2.5 Flash running its highest level of thinking. And we're obviously comparing that to 3 Flash, which is also set on the default dynamic high. And now let's compare the outputs. We're seeing that there's consistency across the board for a lot of these outputs. Aside from some slightly different language in the output, I would put these on par. So not much of a difference for that set of categories. Here we're actually seeing a difference. So it did interpret this slightly differently. The rest of the markers all look to be pretty well the same. When should you be using 3 Flash? In my opinion, I think that it's getting a lot of hype because this is actually on par with 2.5 Pro, if not better in a lot of use cases. But for myself, when I'm considering costs, I use this workflow on a regular basis, multiple times throughout the week. For me, will I make the jump? Probably not, just because I think the outputs are the exact same and there's no need for me to spend an additional 67%, especially given how large the input of tokens are for this process. So if I was using this with a company of up to 1,000 employees, that's going to lead to a significant drainage in cost relative to using 2.5 Flash. I think 2.5 Flash is still the winner. That said, Gemini 3 Flash just released. It's currently still in preview and it may improve or change over time. But for now, I just really don't see a meaningful difference. But comment and let me know if you're using this in different use cases where it makes more sense, especially if you're considering swapping it out for a Pro model like Gemini 3 Pro or 2.5 Pro.